Well, we are at 5 o'clock or 5:30, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I've already told some of the folks who were on earlier that I'm a little nervous. This is we're up to 85 simultaneous connections to this, but we've got a few rules of the road, so we want to make this successful for everybody. And here's what we'd like you to do: we'd like you to stay muted during this. There is a chat button. You'll have to probably do a little looking around to find it, but you should have a button that says chat. And that's how we'd like people to do their asking questions. As you've seen, when multiple people try to talk on Zoom, it doesn't always work so well. So you'll want to find your chat button. Mine is hiding behind more, I think. But that's where we'd like you to send your questions. And then every once in a while, we're going to pause, and Brittany Squire, who is helping us with this this event, is going to come on and share some of the questions that people are asking with Lynn. So I think we'll try that, and we'll see how that works. So stay muted, use the chat. The other thing I want to make you aware of is that we are recording this event, because we know there are people who wanted to be here who couldn't, or who might have had technical difficulties. And so there is a recording in place. If you don't want to be on that recording, you really have a couple of options. You can put a Band-Aid over your camera. I've done that before. Or you can find your camera icon and just push stop video, and that should take care of that. So I think we'll go ahead and get started tonight. And I'm really anxious to hear Lynn talk a little bit more about her forthcoming book, Prairie Bachelor: The Story of a Kansas Homesteader and the Populist Movement, which is forthcoming from the University Press of Kansas very soon. And so excited. I had a chance to read ahead. I appreciated getting an advance copy, and I think you're going to love this book. So I hope you enjoy tonight very much. And before we get started, I do want to just make a few quick introductions of folks and a few welcomes. Before we do, actually, if you got the Populist cocktail, let's just do a cheers. Cheers to Lynn, cheers to Larry for being here tonight. Cheers to all the folks who are with us tonight. And gosh, that first half hour was fun. That was fun listening to all of you talk and get acquainted. I want to thank the FHSU community for being here with us tonight. Our leadership, our faculty, our students, our staff. I know that I saw Dr. Jill Arnsdorf with us, our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. So thank you, Jill, for being here. I want to give a special thanks to 4 people in the FHSU community from Forsyth Library who really worked hard to make this successful night. Brittany Squire, Renee Kaysen from the Dean's Office, Andy Ticknell, who is our video and technical guru on this, and Cindy Landis, who also works with our outreach program and helped us with quite a bit of the preparation of materials for this. And I'm super excited because 2 days ago, I became de-deaned. I am no longer the Dean of Forsyth Library, and I get to introduce our new Dean for Forsyth Library, Ms. Leslie Haas. And Leslie, I'd love it if you could unmute and talk to us for a few minutes. And I'm gonna stop, while you're doing that, I'm gonna stop sharing this slide in the background so we can see more people.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. Deb and everybody here has put on such a great program, and I'm really excited that I, was able to get to Hayes in time and have this be my first event. I got to meet the Fenwicks tonight, and what a great couple, and I'm looking forward to finishing the book and also, being able to talk with them more over, this evening and then, going forward. So I'm just really excited to be here. And I'm really excited to see the number of people that are on this event. I can say that, being new to Hayes, I'm not new to Kansas. My grandparents are from Ness City. And so they are part of the Haas, Depperschmidt, Munch, Wassinger crew that's in that. So I have some, ties. So I'm looking forward to reading the book and seeing if I can pick out names of family in Lynn's book. So I'm going to be quiet now so we can get back to the main event. And again, I want to thank everybody for the warm welcome. And I want to thank Deb for all her hard work in also putting this together. So thank you. Yay.
We're so glad to have you here. I'm going to give you some jazz hands because I hear that's what you're supposed to do.
Oh, okay, like that. There we go.
Some jazz hands. Welcome, Leslie. We're just thrilled to have you now with us. I also just want to give thanks to the Alumni Association who've been our partners in this event and helping get everyone registered and technically connected. Charlene Nichols and Jeannie Billinger, who worked on our registration process. And I think I saw maybe Tammy Welbrock, our interim director for the Alumni Association as well. So thank you all so much. And also thanks to the foundation. I first met Lynn and Larry through the FHSU Foundation. Gosh, must have been 5-6 years ago now. And just so glad I saw Jason Willoughby, our CEO of the foundation, is registered tonight, and Mary Hammond. I know I saw Mary join us. Mary is the foundation director who works with the library. So thank you all for being great partners in this as well. Also a shout out to the University Press of Kansas. You guys were terrific. Derek Helms, I hope you're online. I just so appreciated your help getting organized with this. Bethany Mowry, I hope I said that correctly. Bethany, I hear you were the first editor for the book and really helped Lynn get this wonderful book launched. So appreciate your help. Kelly Chrisman Jacques, who I have met before and who helped also get the book not only to publication, but helped us get this event launched as well tonight. Michael Kehoe, Conrad Roberts, thank you all for being part of this. One of the things I loved about Lynn's book and the acknowledgements she had in her books were just the notations of the important work that museums do and that libraries do. And we're so pleased to have people representing museums and libraries here tonight. I know the Lucille M. Hall Museum in St. John was instrumental in, well, the home of the diary where the journal was found, not the diary, the journal, where the journal was found.
That's something I scold people about, the difference between a journal and a library. I mean, and a diary.
I was going to duck because I knew I had misspoken immediately. Stafford County Historical and Genealogical Museum, Pratt County History Museum. Just really glad to have all of you here from museums and libraries tonight. And so excited to have the Werner family from Wernersville, Pennsylvania, and other places around the United States joining us. I know Jim Werner, we saw him online earlier. David and his wife, Deanne, are with us. Paul, I think, was going to be with us. And Susan Davis, who is connecting somehow up to this family. So another relative of Isaac Werner. So glad to have, I know there are probably more Werners out there, and we're so glad to have you all with us tonight. And before I introduce our featured author tonight, I want to make one more introduction, and it's really a man who probably needs no introduction, Larry Fenwick, but what an amazing spouse Larry is. He's been a supporter, a cheerleader, a research and travel companion, a photographer, and I think, Lynda, you said this in your book, in your acknowledgements, and he's a good sport. So Larry, just thanks for the important role that you've played in bringing this book.
I think he's off wandering somewhere.
Oh, well.
Not a surprise.
Welcome. And so finally, I want to introduce Lynda Beck Fenwick, who I'm going to consistently refer to as Lynn. 1966 graduate of Fort Hays State University in education, began her career in 1967 as an English teacher, moved on to law school at Baylor University, and I believe you were a practicing trial attorney, if I remember that history correctly. She's also the author of 2 previous books. In 1989, she wrote the book Should the Children Pray, which was published by the Baylor University Press. And I believe, make sure I get this right, Lynn, you were Georgia Author of the Year in Nonfiction,
Yes.
Awarded for that book by the Council of Authors and Journalists.
Right.
1998, she wrote Private Choices, Public Consequences, which was published by Dutton Press at that time. And both are part of the Fort Hays State University Forsyth Library collection, but they're found in libraries across the nation. So this is her 3rd book now that we're here to discuss tonight, Prairie Bachelor, the story of a Kansas homesteader and the Populist Movement. And so welcome, Lynn. And I just feel so lucky that I've had a chance to know you and get to know Isaac Werner. And one of the things I loved about my advanced reading was that you started the book with Walt Whitman's poem, which I hope maybe you have a copy of and you might read for us to start us off.
I do. And I was familiar with this particular poem and trying to introduce Isaac Werner and his journal. He passed away in 1895, and yet I was reading his journal he wrote in his journal every single day. And I was living his life currently with him. And so he was a living gentleman to me as I was working on this process. And so I wanted to tell the story of Isaac Werner. And because he was active in the populist movement, he gave me a front row seat to the populist movement. And I wanted to let people know at the beginning of the book that he was more than just a journal keeper, and that his story was going to always carry through to tell the rest of the story about the populist movement. And I remembered this Walt Whitman poem, and it made me think of what Isaac might have said if he knew what was going on. When I read the book, the biography famous, and is this then, said I, what the author calls a man's life? And so will someone when I am dead and gone write my life? As if any man knew aught of my life. Why, even I myself, I often think, know little or nothing of my real life. Only a few hints, a few diffused faint clues and indirections I seek for my own use to trace out here. So I was insistent that be the lead off to the story of Isaac Werner. And I conclude the book by telling Isaac, he asked whether someone would ever write his life. And the answer is, I did.
And, you know, I've had the advantage of getting to know him through your book, but most people here have not had that advantage. Tell us a little bit, why was he special? Why? I mean, besides the fact that he wrote this fantastic journal, what was special about him? What made him stand out?
A lot of things. And the first thing that I would say is that I'll go back to Reverend Beecher. Reverend Beecher was a very famous pastor in his time, and he is the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe. More of us know about who Harriet Beecher Stowe is than remember her brother. But he was a famous preacher even before there was television, and he wrote a column. And Isaac cut his column out of some newspaper or softcover book. And what it said was, diaries, people write about themselves, what's going on in their life, what's going on in their minds, how they feel. And Reverend Beecher said, if you are going to keep a journal, write about the weather, but write about what you observe, not so much about yourself, but about what's going on around you, and what your neighbors are doing, and what's happening politically, and what's happening in the broader world. And Isaac followed that advice. And so in the very beginning of his journal, when he was younger, maybe he hadn't read that from Reverend Beecher, he wrote more about himself. And I'm very grateful for that, because I got to know Isaac personally better from those early years. But then when he was on the Kansas Prairie, he became a wonderful reporter. And that was why he was so valuable. So the very first answer to your question is that he was an eyewitness to the populist movement. He was intimately involved in the struggles that farmers had, trying to carve through the sod and raise enough to have some to sell. And so the struggles that they went through, the deaths of babies that his friends would bury their children before their first birthdays, the prairie fires that wiped out their crops and sometimes traveled down their timber claims and burned down the trees. All of the enormous hardships that they went through, he was going through that with them. But then as the populist movement came along, he described the steps. And I say that the arc of his life was very much like the arc of the populist movement, starting out slow and troubled, reaching a peak, and then basically kind of infighting within the organization, within the political party. The arc began to drop off just as his health brought him to a sad ending. So that's one reason. The other reason is I love books. And as a young druggist in Rossville, Illinois, he spent enormous sums for the time on building his library. I remember one particular time, the books that he had ordered, he spent $52 and some cents on a box of books. And at that time, $52 was huge. So the fact that he was an autodidact, he continued to learn. I know he was still in school when he was 17, because the Haynes Church had a wonderful book that was published, I think, in 1914, that I referred back to a great deal for information, a lot of wonderful, helpful information about the Werner family. And I'm delighted that we have Werner family here with us today. I was able to refer back and find where he was still in school at the age of 17, which was a lot longer than a lot of people at that time stayed in school. So he was well educated. He loved books. He was an inventor. He was active in all of the farmers' activities and then the political activities. So there are a great many reasons why I thought he was a particularly valuable person to educate all of us on the populist movement. And it's such an amazing time in American history. The political party that they created is the most successful third party ever in American history, the People's Party. And yet, I'm going to say this. Those of you who are familiar with the Populist Party, would you raise your hands? And my husband doesn't count. I see a few hands, but it is just forgotten. And a great many of the things that the People's Party advocated were adopted by our traditional two parties today. And at the time, they were not being considered at all. We still hear about populism and progressivism, and we heard a lot about it during the campaignings, especially populists and progressives. And so the events of those times are as relevant as today's news, and yet we don't know where they came from, most of us. I didn't until I started reading Isaac's journal.
I come from Western Kansas homesteaders, farmers. I really enjoyed reading about his farm too, and agriculture, and just his creativity and inventiveness in terms of taking care of that farm. And that's near where your family also homesteaded and lived. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and I did not know that when I started reading. I just had learned that I knew the lady who ended up with his journal, and she was my father's first cousin, Lucille M. Hall, and she funded the starting and a lot of the Lucille M. Hall Museum in St. John, Kansas. And Isaac, when he was not able to take care of himself anymore, the first family that he went to for care was my family, the Hall family. And so I knew that, and I knew about the journal, and I couldn't find it. She had passed away, and no one knew what had happened to the journal. And if I finally found it, and it was in a box in the basement of the museum, where it had been packed up in this box after she died, and they hadn't yet gone through all of the boxes that they brought to the museum. And so that was one family connection. And another family connection was my Beck family. And that is the place that my husband and I now have restored, and we live on that farm. And when I read the legal description of Isaac's property, the township in which that encompassed the land where he claimed his homesteads, it was an oversized township. And so the western part of it split off from the eastern part of it. And I was reading the legal description thinking it was in that western part, because that western part is called Clear Creek. But when it split, now it's Albano Township where his land actually was. So I had no idea that he lived near my family. I just knew that they were mentioned in his journal. And when I actually discovered what the legal description described in the new name, Albano, he lives a mile east of the farm on which I was raised. There's a full section between us, and our farm is on the east part of that section in the middle of us. And then his farm is on we're on the west side and he's on the east side, but he's on the near side and we're on the near side. So it's basically a mile apart from where I was raised and what he claimed as his homestead. And his timber claim was a mile north. So he had a half of a square mile that he claimed as a homesteader.
You know, I haven't asked you this before, Lynn, but I'm curious. You found this journal, and it must have been a thrill to open that box, and there it was. When you saw this, when did you decide you would write a book, or what were your first thoughts?
Well, I chased the book down because I wanted to read about my ancestors. And it's 480 pages long, a great big oversized leather-bound book like you would see at the courthouse. So it's not just 480 pages. If it were on regular size pages, it would probably be half again that much. And so once I found the book and started reading the book, I had my nice little note cards where I was going to, first of all, write down anything about my family. And then I started writing about really interesting things. And then I thought, I'm writing all the time. This journal is about history. It is not about my family. And yes, my three greats are all mentioned in it, but I just knew immediately. And because it was taking me so long to keep notes as I went, I just decided it needed to be transcribed. And so I started typing, and it took me about 11 months. And during the time that I was transcribing it, and I tried to just transcribe what was there. I didn't correct anything, or didn't mean to. And after 11 months, I was also, every time I came to a person's name, any person, famous or just a person's name, I went to Ancestry.com and I researched them, because I would have gone blind or crazy if I had just typed for that many hours every day. And I learned about the people in the community, and it was just a story that had to be told.
I just had a dog walking through the house. So sorry, I totally lost.
I've seen a cat already.
But I was just going to say, maybe this is a good time that I see several questions coming through in chat, and maybe we could have Brittany stop and share some of the questions with us for you.
Yes, thank you so much, Deb. And Lynn, our first question is about can you talk a little bit about the county that the farm is located in?
The farm is located in Stafford County, and that is south central Kansas. And the county seat is St. John, Kansas, named after Governor St. John. There's an interesting story there about the founding of the city. And they were hoping to get the county seat, and maybe they beat out Stafford for the county seat, even Stafford is a town in Stafford County. Maybe it helped that they had named St. John after the governor. I don't know, but that was their plan anyway. So he was in the southernmost part of Stafford County. His homestead claim was on the county line. And so immediately over the county line is Pratt County. And he went to Pratt County regularly. So he traveled to Pratt County and Stafford County most of all, although he did make some potato selling trips to other counties.
Thank you, Lynn. We also had another question come in asking if the handwriting was difficult to read and decipher during your research.
He wrote neatly, but he wrote densely. And the style of some of the lettering was slightly different back then. It would be difficult to read that much handwriting crowded onto a big page. You would practically go blind if the person had taken penmanship 101. But it was eye strain, yes. But once I got used to his writing, it wasn't that difficult, except that it was just a lot of eye strain. He wrote neatly, but he wrote in the way that when you have to go to town for your ink and you have spent a lot of money on a big leather-bound journal, you crowd. And so there was always a little border on the outside. And in that border, he sometimes drew pictures of the inventions that he was designing, and he wrote keys so that as you would be reading along, and now when I go back and when I was footnoting and doing the indexing, it was helpful because he would write planted corn or trip to Pratt or just little keys like that, so that when he went back, and the first thing he always did was he wrote the weather. He wrote the temperature and whether it was raining or if the wind was blowing or something like that. So that was always written. And then he wrote clear to the binding. And it was just very dense to read, but he wrote neatly.
And Lynn, do you journal every day in the same way that Isaac did?
No, I don't, but I do write a blog. And one of the things that is a writing challenge. And what I tended to do, especially in the latter days of when we were doing a lot of refinements and I did the indexing myself and I was busy, I would try to look ahead and see when I was likely to get involved in assignments related to the journal or the book. And I would try to do blogs in advance if I didn't have a lot of time. So in doing the research for a book, and I know I have some writers here. They don't all write history, but Talia has published as well. And when you are writing a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, your mind is always thinking about things going on around you that might improve the book. And I tell the story that when Larry and I used to drive along on the highways, we would see a sign that said, "Turn here to see something." And you'd go, "Oh, we need to do that the next time we go by here." And we all do that. Well, while I was doing the research for Isaac, we would turn off because I wanted to absorb as much as I could about Kansas, what was going on. One of my blogs is about the Beecher Bibles, and Reverend Beecher, I immediately thought of Isaac's respect for Reverend Beecher, and the Beecher Bibles. Reverend Beecher was very active in social events, like a lot of our modern day ministers are, and he was on the Union side, and so he raised money for rifles, and then he would ship them in big crates labeled Bibles, and he would put the rifles in the bottom of the box, and then he would cover that kind of with straw or something, and then the Bibles would be on top and the rifles would be on the bottom, and the boxes would be labeled Bibles, and so they would get through without being recognized as weapons if a Southern encounter would have otherwise have stopped them. That's the kind of thing that is nowhere in the book. But the fact that I did these detours, that I learned odd little things. There was an old schoolhouse that I kept saying we need to photograph that, and when I finally photographed it, it was falling in, and so I was absorbing, looking back to what was going on in his time, and it informed me. And then I had all this stuff that didn't get in the book, and it often ends up in the blog.
Then one of the things that intrigued me, I know he was a bachelor, he never married. He was a strong proponent, it seemed to me, of women's rights. Is that accurate?
This is not me reading something into it. It's there. It's in his book. And at one point, he even ordered a book on elocution because he wanted to hone his speaking skills, because, as he said, I want to speak for women's suffrage, and I think it's going to be around for quite a while. And so he definitely cared about that. He had a twin brother, and then he had 3 sisters, but one of the sisters died when she was very young. And his 2 sisters, I think he was more sensitive to mistreatment of women because of his sisters. He lived in a boarding house in Illinois when he was a young druggist there, and he got very impatient with the way that the master of the house, his landlord, treated his wife, the lady of the house. And he felt that was, he wondered why she didn't speak up. And then he decided that she was used to her husband's blowing. And so that he didn't think there was much point in speaking up. Another thing that he recorded in his journal was there was a young lady who was hired as a bookkeeper, and he noticed that she was quite attractive. And there were a few entries in the Illinois time of the journal about this young lady. And the proprietor of the store called on Isaac. They were friends. They communicated before, but he kind of let it be known that he had informed this young lady bookkeeper, the first female bookkeeper in town, that she needed to turn down the young gentlemen who were inviting her to dances if she intended to keep her job. And he recorded that in his journal, and she was never mentioned again. He took the hint.
Well, how was he connected? I think Doug Hurt just sent this through as a question too, but how was Isaac connected to the populist movement and to the People's Party?
Well, the People's Party and the populist movement, there were many other attempts to form political parties. And this was not the very first one. So the People's Party sort of adopted and learned from some of those earlier parties. And I do mention them in the book, but they predate and didn't have a whole lot to do with Isaac. But the first real kind of venture by the farmers, particularly by the farmers, was the Farmers Alliance. And it was not a political party. They wanted farmers to come together and try to figure out a way to confront the things that they saw as mistreatments. But it was an organization that it didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. Those were the two main parties even then. They wanted farmers to come together in a group, and they were more motivated about education, educating themselves, learning what they could do to improve their crops, sharing ideas with one another. And that non-political party gradually morphed into a political party. And Kansas was the first to have a state People's Party. And after Kansas was successful in electing state officers, then there was a move to have a national political party, a national People's Party political party. He started with the Alliance, the Farmers Alliance. He was active in that. He was a lecturer at their meetings. And so that was his beginning. And then there were a lot of the people that were in that non-political group who got active in the Kansas, just state People's Party, and he joined them. And then it became a national party.
Brittany,
Lynn,
we've got quite a few more questions.
Lynn, on this same topic, I was going to ask a question that came up. Did Isaac express a strong opinion in favor or against the creation of agrarian cooperatives? And in your research, is there any indication that he was organizing anything to that effect in Stafford or the surrounding communities?
He was the founder of the county organization. And it was an organization for farmers. And it also included the businessmen in St. John. It was a countywide organization, and they were, their charter said, a nice elaborate horticulture. It had a very grand title of livestock, and growing crops, and even somehow involving crops in the water. That was included in it, and fine horses. So yes, he was the one who started talking that up. He visited the storekeepers. He wrote letters to the farmers, and he was the one who made it happen. He was, when they gathered together and chose officers, he was chosen as the secretary, and a former Union general who had settled in Kansas, in Stafford County, was the president. Isaac was often elected in the groups that he participated in. He was often elected as the secretary because he was regarded as a literate man. And people came to him to draw up contracts, and they also came to him to draw up building plans. He had a reputation for being one of the more learned men in the community. But yes, he did start the party and the county co-op. I'm not going to come up with the name right now. The County Agricultural Society, the Stafford County Agricultural Society, is what he started.
And do you have a sense of what his opinions were about railroad and elevator regulation, mortgages, and free silver?
Yes, that there's a lot in that question. The farmers had a love-hate relationship with the railroads. They wanted their railroads to come near them. But once the railroads were there, they felt like the railroads were cheating them. And the example that I give is to ship his corn to markets in the East. It cost him a bushel of corn for every bushel if he had 2 bushels, one of them was eaten up by the fee for shipping, and then the profit was in the other one. So he had to have 2 bushels of corn to ship and get the profit from one of them. And the railroads, the government gave them a huge amount of land. I can't rattle off the number. Huge acreage across the nation to encourage them to build the tracks. They gave them land alongside the tracks to sell and make even more money. But Isaac did not. That's not how he acquired his land. But once they wanted them to come to their town, and they bought bonds and then felt like they got cheated when they had underwritten the railroads. They felt like between giving them the land to come across and then selling the bonds for the railroad, that the people getting wealthy hadn't really put any money into it, but they were the ones raking all of the cash out of it. So there was a real love-hate relationship about the railroad. What were the other things you asked me about?
Silver. She asked about.
Oh, that was the thing that really broke the relationships in the People's Party. There were those who thought that the solution to the financial inadequacies for farmers rested in going from the gold standard to bimetallism, gold and silver. And then there were those who thought that the best way to help farmers was to set up a system of granaries that farmers could put their crop into and then borrow against at a reasonable rate, instead of being at the mercy of merchants, to whom, especially in the South, the merchants were also their bank, and in a sense. And so they would take a lien on the farmers' crops. And then as soon as the crops were harvested, they would demand payment on the note. And then the farmer had to borrow money again to buy the seeds for the next year's crop. So particularly in the South, it ended up that the crops ended up all being sold as soon as harvest was over. That problem wasn't quite as severe in Kansas and in northern places where they could, most of the debt in Kansas was buying land and equipment. And they did that at staggered times. So that didn't mean every farmer in the community went to town and said, I need to buy a team, or I need to buy a drill, or whatever it was that they wanted to buy. And so that was staggered a little bit. And even though having the warehouses that they could store their grain and borrow in an organized way and manage their sales better, the northern farmers would have benefited from it too, but it wasn't quite as stressing as it was on the southern farmers. And that was what split the party. The idea of the storage and cheaper loans, that was more of a southern philosophy. And the northern philosophy was silver and gold, not just based on gold.
One of the things that really jumped out to me that was different in those times was just the amount of, I'm not sure if there's a word, bartering, trading work, it seemed like in the diary, he would keep track of the work that he did for others and the work that others had done for him, and quite a system of bartering and sharing work, and starting out with no horses. So, needing to work with others who had the equipment he needed or the horsepower that he needed. Can you just tell a little bit more about what that system was like?
Well, the Werner family may know that in his obituary, he was praised for his craftsmanship in wood. He was very respected for that. And so when he came to Kansas and he needed money to buy a horse, he was doing all of his breaking of sod by bartering or trying to do it himself, with hand tools. And he did his planting by hand until later. So what he would do is he would go and do carpentry work for the people that had horses. And then in turn, they would come and break sod for him so he could open up more ground. And in his journal, he mentioned he wanted to sit down and get everything straightened out so that he wasn't too far or too far, getting ahead of or behind. He wanted to try to keep it to where he didn't owe that farmer more or that farmer didn't owe him more. So yes, there was a bartering system. They didn't exactly call it that, but they just kept records of what they were doing. And in effect, that is what they were doing.
And he was an inventor. Did his invention ever actually, I know he built it and he tested it. Did it ever end up going into production?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I did everything that I could figure out to do. Yes, he was an inventor, and he was even inventing as a young druggist in Wernersville. He invented a bottle washer to clean out his bottles that in his drugstore. And he invented an arm for a guy who had an elbow injury. He invented a thing to manipulate the arm and while it was healing and hold it in place and let him have some movement. So yes, he was definitely an inventor. And I guess you would also call him a tinkerer, because if he saw something that wasn't working very efficiently, he would try to tinker with it and invent some way that it would work better. But the big thing that he did was his 3-horse cultivator. And he had great high hopes for that 3-horse cultivator, that he wanted to encourage local businesses, local hardware stores. I mean, he built it himself out of wood and metal and whatever he used. And he felt like it was a way that farmers would not have to pay all the people down the line who were making money by the time an implement got to them. And if they could just have a local manufacturer and buy locally, that would be a way to help them. And so he invented this 3-horse cultivator, and he was very, very proud of it. He wrote a letter to Washington, D.C. once to see if his, he had seen pictures of thatched roofs in England. And he thought that if they could do thatched roofs on cottages in England, they could do thatched roofs from the prairie hay and have thatched roofs on the places in Kansas. I want you to buy my book and see how that worked out. But he was always inventing things. And yes, he made the moves to try to find a local source. A hardware store is the one that I'm specifically remembering that he called on, that could build his 3-horse cultivator and turn it into a business where they could save money and have an implement that was more suited for the sandy loam soils in the area. But unfortunately, as his health declined, that part of the story was not in the journal, whether he ever succeeded in getting that done.
You also have to buy the book in order to find out how he died, or how we suppose he died. Somebody was asking on the questions when he died, and that was that was at the age of 51, how old he was, and that was in 1895. Is that correct, Lynn?
That's right.
You started the book with the funeral, and that fascinated me. That really sucked me in when I was reading. Why did you decide to start at the end?
I was writing for 2 audiences. I was writing for the audience that just wanted a story about Isaac Werner and his community and what was going on in the larger world at that same time. So I was writing a story for those people, but I was also writing for people who were interested in the populist movement, who wanted that political story told to them. And I thought that it was very, very important to establish in the beginning of the book what led up to people wanting to form a political party, the hardships that they had, the things that they tried first before they formed a political party. So I wanted to tell, and I wanted them to care about Isaac. I wanted them to get to know Isaac and genuinely care about him so that he pulled them into the story. And so I wrote about his funeral so that they could learn about him and the people that would have come to his funeral, because his book made it clear who his friends were. He wrote about funerals in that particular cemetery. And I could assume, I use a puzzle, when you find an old puzzle and you put it together and you discover that there are just a few pieces missing. Well, I use that analogy to what I know about Isaac's life. I know a lot about it, but there were some places where I had to make some conclusions based on outside information. And so I wanted people to get to know him and care about him. And I wanted the clues about how they formed these organizations, because there were people at the funeral that he knew through those organizations. There would have been people at his funeral who were involved in the political process later. So I wanted to use that as an introduction to the book and a draw to pull them into the book.
Well, it worked for me, just let me say. In fact, I read it once, and I'm really excited now to go back and read it again. And I do know how he died. So the rest of you will have to wait to to find out. Lynn, we're getting toward the end of our program. I just want to give you a chance to talk about some things maybe I haven't asked or we haven't had on the questions yet. Are there other things in particular that you'd like this group to know?
I think what I would like you to know is especially that I researched the book as carefully as I researched my two nonfiction books. I researched it from an academic's perspective. And I think that scholars and serious historians can read the book and discover a lot of things. I think a scholar is more apt to write about the populist movement, looking at the leadership and then kind of clumping the people that were the voters, people like Isaac, just kind of putting them in a generalized description. And I wanted to bring the full picture. I wanted you to know about the suffragettes. I wanted you to know about the Prohibition Party. I write in there at one point that people paid a great deal of attention to their friends' health and their drinking. It was. I wanted you to know what these people that in academic volumes you won't really meet. This book is a story. It is a story about a community and a state and a region. Texas was the beginning point. It was the party was really, its roots were in Texas for about 10 years, and then it gradually expanded in the South, and then it came into the mid-states. I wanted you to know that background and how hard the people worked, how many women died in childbirth, how many people lived in houses where they had frostbite and lost their toes inside their homes, how many people lost herds of sheep and herds of cattle in the storms because they didn't have sheds to protect them. I wanted how many people watched prairie fires, which were a huge threat, burn down their entire crop, sometimes burn down their homes. I wanted you to care about these people. And then I wanted you to appreciate how these people, ordinary people, also lawyers and people, merchants in the town centers, but how these people confronted what we think of as the golden age. I mean, they make movies about the golden age in New York City and their fancy women with their pearls and all of that. That's what we know about that era. And what is a lot more interesting is what was happening out on the prairie and in the ranches, where small ranchers were confronting large landowners who didn't want these small ranchers coming in, and workers in factories. These were the people that created the movement for this populist movement and the People's Party. And I wanted people to learn about how much, especially the ideas that we take for granted, the things that we think happened when Social Security was first introduced as something, well, that was a populist idea, wanting to help people out. There are a great many roots that we take for granted today that go directly back to that era. And that's what I wanted to share.
Well, it is a marvelous book. I'm going to try to do a share. You all are going to love it, I promise. I'm going to try to do a share of the screen with the order information.
Lynn, while Deb is getting that ready, I thought there was one question asked earlier that might be a great way to sort of cap off your notes just then. The question was, do you think that Isaac had a notion that someone would be reading his journal someday and turning it into this wonderful book that you have?
I don't think he did. I think his last entry is sad. Not much mail matter these days. He was close with his family, but when you don't see your family for a long time and they have families and you're out on the prairie all alone, it's hard. It's hard to keep those connections. I think it's a whole lot like as if any man knew aught of my life. Why, even I myself often think I know little or nothing of my real life. I think he didn't. I don't think he had any idea. I suspect because the first place that he went when he could no longer care for himself was to my great-grandfather Hall's home. And that the lady that has formed the museum in St. John is his, she would have been his great-granddaughter. And I think he took his journal with him there. He stayed with them for 14 days, I believe, and they had small children, and it was just too much. He took round-the-clock care at that point. And so he went to another neighbor's house. And I think that when he left that journal behind, he probably thought that was it. He probably thought that was it. And I'm just so thrilled that I found it, and I think it's worth sharing. And I hope you all fall in love with Isaac the way that I did.
This is where we all get to do our jazz hands.
Thank you so much, all of you. The support that I have had for a decade is absolutely amazing. Thank you, Fort Hays State. Thank you, University Press of Kansas. I cannot thank everybody. I look on this screen and so many people have encouraged me or shared things with me or believed that I really could do this. I can't thank enough people, but everybody, thank you for coming. If you didn't do a darn thing for me the last decade, thank you for showing up. I just can't express it.
You can easily also just Google University Press of Kansas, Prairie Bachelor, and you will find the book. And like I said, thanks to the press, not only for this longer term discount code, but right now they have a heck of a sale going on. So this is a great time to order the book. I want to just ask real quick, Brittany, is there anything else that we need to tell people before we adjourn?
Thank you, Deb. You've mentioned all the relevant notes. I would just share that I've shared one more link for you all in the chat. And if you have a few moments, we would love it if you would provide us just a few comments or feedback from this evening's event. So you will find that link there in the chat, as well as additional links for Lynn's blog and the ordering instructions, in addition to the follow-up you'll get that Deb mentioned. So thank you so much, everyone.
I'm going to say thank you to my biggest fan, my husband.
Larry.
He's been a big part of this project. I thanked a lot of people, and I want to make sure I thank him.
Well, thank you, darling. I would just simply say thanks again to all the library, and thanks to the University Press of Kansas people, particularly thanks to all the Werner family members that joined us, and certainly Alan Hankston, who has stayed up real early in the morning for Wednesday to be a part of this. So thanks everybody as well.
All of you, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening for me, and it is a memory I will have forever.